It's not only historic cars. At the famous Le Mans 24-hour race, just 1 week before Goodwood, Scotsman Alan McNish scored the greatest victory of his young career for Porsche. So, has winning Le Mans changed his life?
It's changed it in some ways, because I don't think you can actually be victorious at Le Mans and not have it change, but hopefully for the better. We had a very good race and a very hard race, and thankfully we came out on top. But it could very easily go the other way, because I was out in the car and we're 1 lap ahead of the sister car, number 25, and I saw it going very slowly along the Mulsanne, and I thought this is a perfect opportunity to pull some extra time. But within half a lap myself, I had a water leak and had to come in for a 30-minute pit stop, and both the Porsches, the first and second car, were sitting in the pits having 30-minute repairs done to them at the same time. That was quite a hard time for us.
Le Mans this year was a double British victory. The GT2 class was won by Justin Bell, son of 5 times Le Mans winner Derek.
Anyone that finishes Le Mans in any position is over the moon. It's an amazing achievement. I always remember Dad saying to the Porsche engineers when his heyday, the way to win Le Mans is not to have a problem. Now, obviously, Al got away with it, in the Porsche, because they all had problems, but they just had less than any of the others. And we didn't. We just put some oil, water, and changed tyres, changed dust, added fuel, and off we went. And that meant we won by 6 laps.
To see him winning Le Mans and proving that he is just as good as anybody out there and just giving the machinery, I think was wonderful, and I was very proud for him. And I think the emotion was the fact that he'd proved to everybody, I was not there, I had nothing to do with it. He didn't have to bounce off Dad's shoulders. He was there totally on his own, proved and sort of really guided the two younger drivers all the way.
McNish's call to race this car came from Porsche competitions boss Herbert Ampferer.
It was extremely nice to be able to give him the victory, and also for Norbert Singer, who designed the car, because these are the people that have actually stood by Alan McNish, stood by Yannick Dalmash, Jörg Müller-Nuvalz, and put their necks on the line. But thankfully came up with the goods this time.
This is the 50th anniversary of Porsche, and Goodwood 1998 is acknowledging that with a tremendous array of Porsches, covering the Stuttgart Mark's half-century of sports car competition. Now, if you saw the Steve McQueen movie Le Mans back in the 1970s, you'll recognize this car. It's the mighty Porsche 917, a flat 12 air-cooled monster, introduced in 1969, and in the blue and orange colours of the John Wyer Gulf team, it went on to dominate long-distance sports car racing. This car actually starred in the film, but it now belongs to the British enthusiast Mark Finborough. 600 horsepower, 235 miles an hour when it's going in a straight line, but it was always a real handful. The drivers used to say they feared it more than they loved it. Marc Surer now, the Swiss veteran with a long career in BMW-powered cars, and this is a brand new Le Mans car, first raced in the 24 hours last week. It's a car designed and built for BMW by the Williams Grand Prix team, who will use BMW engines in Formula One, and he spun it! He spun it! On that first tight right-hander after the start, it's very wet, slippery and greasy. He's gone through 360 degrees. He's driving across the grass now, back onto the tarmac. He's gathered it all together, and back on up the hill goes the Swiss Marc Surer. But the weather conditions are constantly changing. There's mud, there's grease on this hill. It's going to be very, very treacherous all weekend.
Mark, you had a nice new car there, and what did you do with it?
Oh, well, I tried to find the limit. Actually, when I was waiting until after the trees, to put my foot down, and it went sideways. I wasn't surprised. I was expecting that, but there was not enough opposite look. So I went, oh, that's the end. So I hit the brakes and spun it, so it was all under control, easy.
It was all under control, was it?
Yes, of course.
Now let's ride up this narrow, tight, slippery hill. We're with Brian Redman, one of the great British all-rounders, in a truly awe-inspiring Porsche. The version of the 917, built for the Can-Am Racing Series in North America in 1969. Brian getting on the brakes now, coming into the tight left-hander, which is Molecombe Corner, one of the hardest corners on the hill. Then he's on the power for that short straight, a flinty wall on his left. You don't want to get too near that. And then the sweeping curves right and then left. And as we ride with Brian, we can see just how narrow this hill is. There's no margin at all for error, and most of these cars cars are worth millions. Now the shriek of a 12-cylindered Ferrari, the agile little Type 333 SP. It's driven by the former Ferrari F1 driver Luca Badoer. This car was never raced by the factory, but it was effectively a privately funded sports prototype. Very quick too.
Ken Tyrrell and the Tyrrell Racing organisation are two names that demand respect in Formula One. Ken, though, has called it a day, selling his team at the age of 73. What's more, the man who launched his attack on the Formula One summit from a timber yard some 28 years ago decided to sell his collection of Tyrrell cars at the Goodwood Brooks auction. To get to this point, though, Ken had been on an adventure, the likes of which we'll never see again. And of course, Jackie Stewart was a leading player.
This is where it happened. This is where we gave Jackie a test. His first drive in a single-seater car, and you know, you'd have to be an idiot not to recognise the talent.
Once you had the driver, you needed the car. The 001 was to set Tyrrell on its way to 2 World Championships.
The fact that we were able to race this car in 1970 and show that it was very competitive meant that we were able to find the sponsorship money necessary to go on in 1971.
The story of Tyrrell really could have come from the pages of any boy's own annual, and in the multi-million-pound era of Formula One, you would think there's little chance of it ever being repeated.
We must never start thinking that there isn't somebody else that can do a better job than we did. There's always somebody around who can do it better. Records are always being broken.
A word of warning before we all splash out on a second-hand McLaren and go tilting at windmills: you'll need that most important of Formula One accessories, bottomless pockets.
It's difficult to start now, only because the amount of money you need in order to take part in Formula One is astronomical. You know, if you haven't got 30 to 35 million dollars in your first year, forget it. Just don't bother. If you haven't got that, just don't bother. Whereas our first year, when we used the Matra was a car on free loan to us. We bought the engines and the transmissions and did all the maintenance and preparation. But our first year sponsorship was £80,000, and we gave 20 of that to Jackie. So times have changed.
Before Tyrrell arrived on the F1 scene, Brabham was a top name. Jack Brabham is the only man to have won the World Championship in a car bearing his own name. And here he is, Sir Jack now, 72 years old, in the car he raced in 1967. It's the Brabham BT24, a simple space-frame car powered by an Australian Repco V8 engine. Jack won the World Championship in 1966, but in 1967, his own teammate Denny Hulme beat him to the title. Here's a Formula One face of today, Johnny Herbert, and most appropriately, he's in a Lotus. Johnny drove for Lotus in their last Grand Prix season in 1994. So it's fitting that he should be at the wheel of this Lotus Type 92, the last Formula One Lotus that the late Colin Chapman was involved in before his untimely death. And the name on the side of the car is Nigel Mansell, because the future world champion drove this car in 1983, along with teammate Elio De Angelis. On the hill now, the Formula One car of another great British world champion. The late James Hunt drove this McLaren M26 in 1977, the year after he won the title, taking wins in the British, Japanese and United States Grand Prix. Now this is someone special, the great Mario Andretti. There's Murray Walker watching open-mouthed as Andretti, great IndyCar driver, great sports car driver, relives his years in Formula One. The car is the car that Mario won the World Championship with in 1978, the Lotus 79. He hasn't sat in it for 20 years. He hasn't been to Goodwood before either, but Mario is a charger and he's storming down towards Molecombe Corner. Once a racer, always a racer.
I never imagined it was going to be this much fun, and to see so many enthusiasts here, it's very heartwarming. I was actually surprised myself because it's almost like a cliche, like riding a bicycle. You know, you get back into it, and I recognize pretty much all the bumps and lumps. And the more running that I'm doing, obviously the more confident I feel. But, yeah, this was a nice reunion for me.
Here's a Formula One car from a different generation, the turbocharged era. A Ferrari turbo from the mid-1980s, driven by one of the works Ferrari drivers of the time, the Swede Stefan Johansson. Back with Tyrrell again, and now we're bang up to date. This is Tora Takagi, one of this year's Tyrrell Grand Prix drivers, in the latest 1998 Tyrrell 026. Ford V10 engine, narrow track to comply with the latest Formula One regulations. Ahead of him, on the hill there, Riccardo Patrese, veteran Grand Prix driver, drove for Williams at the peak of his career, and he's in last year's Williams, but in this year's colours. And as he crosses the line, Takagi in pursuit. And you can see how much narrower this car looks, the wheels set closer to the bodywork. That's what the 1998 Formula One regulations say in what will be the final year of Tyrrell in Formula One.
Well, there's a few special bikes here, but particularly the Norton is one which people had never seen before. It was built in the middle of 1954, tested by the factory on one occasion only, and then because of politics, it got put away into the cellar, and no one saw it or it never raced.
And that's where John Surtees' relationship with the Model F Norton began.
I then found out where the parts were, which had gone to a gentleman who got it when the factory had closed, and eventually from his son, who had sort of inherited the parts, I managed to obtain them in 1991, and been building it ever since, and it was completed early this year, and this is the first time out in England.
The Model F is the centrepiece in a celebration of 100 years of Norton, and for Surtees it holds fond memories.
Well, I should have ridden it in my first year of World Championship racing. I would have actually gone World Championship racing 1 year earlier if it had been prepared and Nortons had carried on with their programme. So, in a way, it sort of put the clock back and riding something now which I should have ridden in 55.
BMW may not dominate the track these days, but their chic, sophisticated image disguises an incredible racing history spanning 75 years.
In 1936, BMW introduced a racing bike, and in view of my knowledge of the Isle of Man, I got inveigled with it, and so I rode a BMW in the Isle of Man in 37, 38, and 39.
In racing, we do in the moment not so much. We only prepared some motorbike for Paris-Dakar. But for a normal touring motorbike, I think BMW motorbikes are the best in the world.
Classic bikes from BMW's past have been on show, including the compressor which George Meyer rode to victory in the Isle of Man TT way back in 1939. But despite the changing faces of BMW bikes, they all have one thing in common.
Well, they had shaft drive, they were docile, they were beautifully made, and they gave the public what they wanted, I suppose.
I was in South America, I was in Australia, I was also in Asia, and always with a BMW motorbike, and I came always home.
Coming up, our cousins from across the pond. Yes, the Indy cars like these are here in force for the first time, and local Formula One superhero, Johnny Herbert. Welcome back. It's amazing the people you bump into here. Eva Herzegovina, nice to see you here.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Are you here for the vintage cars or the racing cars up on the hill climb?
For both, actually. I love the racing old cars, and I love the exhibition of the old cars that you've never seen before. You know, the design and the rarity of it. It's like so special. It's just beautiful.
They're very beautiful. Do you follow motorsport a lot?
Do I follow it?
Yeah, it's like the Formula One races.
You know what? I have never understood why men are so into it. You know, just staring at these cars passing by. And finally, I've actually been on a photo shoot with Michael Schumacher about 2 years ago. And I was glued to the seat, you know, watching everything. And it was really, really exciting. So I finally got it. And this is even better, you know. This is like old cars. You can go back into the, you know, history. It's exciting.
The Cartier Style et Luxe at Goodwood is a sort of open-air gallery for automotive works of art. By invitation only, some of the world's most beautiful motor cars, like this 1937 Delage with coachwork by Letourneur et Marchand, or this Ferrari Mexico, Chaperon de la Haye Teardrop Talbot Mercedes 500K, and a Voisin Grand Sport with unmistakably French bodywork by Figoni et Falaschi. What about a Mini? This one belonged to Beatle George Harrison.
This is the man responsible for the Festival of Speed and, in fact, the regeneration of Goodwood as a race circuit. You've got a few thousand guests in this weekend, Lord March.
You're having a bit of a party here, I think, yeah.
And some very special cars, which we can hear warming up in the background at the moment.
Very special, yeah. I think we've got most of the Indianapolis grid out there at the moment. Andretti in the current Swift, Rick Mears, Al Unser, all of them are here.
And, of course, you took this on from your grandfather, who started Goodwood back in, what, the late 40s?
Well, he started the circuit in 48, yes, and that closed again in 66. And we're reviving that on September the 18th this year, 50 years to the day that it all began.
So what makes this so special that you get so many thousand visitors and all the famous names come too?
I don't know, really. I think it's just become a bit of a, you know, it's become something special that people want to come to, which is terrific from our point of view. And we attract the cars from all over the world and try and bring the right drivers for the cars. It's just one of those things that I guess kind of gel.
The weather's not been brilliant, obviously, this weekend, but people don't seem to care.
No, I think they're also, well, hopefully they're also keen to be here. They don't really notice.
For Gotham City, read Goodwood. For millionaire Bruce Wayne, we'll make do with Lord March. But Batman's arch enemies were having a ball. The parties are almost as legendary as the racing at Goodwood, and this year's offering had that movie magic. A night of glamour at Goodwood, but it was a bit different during the day. The rain came, but it didn't deter huge crowds. Some found better ways of getting around than others.
There's nowhere else in the world that could put on something like this.
Best place in the world to be. Yeah, I've never been to anything like it before in my life. It's superb.
One of Goodwood's biggest attractions is it gives the punters a chance to get close, even touch the machines that dominated the track in their time.
And a star in its time was this steam-driven de Dion quadricycle, which won the world's first ever motor race in 1887, 20 miles from Paris to Versailles at an average speed of 16 miles an hour. By contrast, the 1918 Straker Squire seems positively modern. Let's ride with owner and restorer Nick Howell. Not a lot of brakes on this car. Very, very heavy steering. And lots of power. The engine comes from a World War I aeroplane, 6 individual cylinders, 4 litres, lots of torque, and a top speed of 110 miles an hour. At the famous Brooklands track in the 1920s, the Straker Squire took 13 victories, and that dramatic black and white striped paint job is the car's original livery. This is Johnny Thomas, who has restored from a pile of bits perhaps the most important racing car in Britain's motoring history. If you like, this is our first Formula One car. It's the 6.5-litre Napier that won the Gordon Bennett Trophy in 1902, an incredible race from Paris in France to Innsbruck in Austria. And it's green. Green was Napier's factory colour, but it gave us our own national colour of British racing green. The French always like to do things differently, and in 1923, this Voisin was years ahead of its time. It used a monocoque chassis construction, just like a Grand Prix car of today. And this magnificent 1936 Auto Union V16 is one of the great Grand Prix cars of all time, driven today by the current Audi touring car racer Emanuele Pirro.
Really, I will have difficulties to forget this weekend. I would never have thought to pass such a wonderful time, to see so many cars, so much history, all concentrated in one spot.
This is the 1961 world champion, the American Phil Hill. He's 71 years old now, but he's still a hard competitor. And he's driving one of the most priceless Ferraris of all, the 375 Mille Miglia Spider. This particular car, in the white and blue racing colours of the USA, is the very machine that Phil drove 44 years ago in the daunting Carrera Panamericana, the road race through Mexico. And those Mexican roads probably make his lordship's drive seem wide and smooth. Into Molecombe. Raining hard now, it's very, very slippery. This car has almost 500 horsepower. And Phil's using most of it. Almost every racing Porsche has been a two-seater sports car, but this is Porsche's first single-seater, the little Type 787 Formula 2 car of 1960. It's very simple, a flat 4 air-cooled engine in the back, clearly displaying its Volkswagen ancestry. But with former world champion John Surtees at the wheel, it's a very quick piece of kit. Surtees, one of the all-time motor racing greats of the 1960s, of course, one of the greats of the 1950s, is Tony Brooks.
What's it like driving a big old Formula One car like this up the narrow, twisty Goodwood hill?
Well, it's particularly in wet conditions like this, without any practice, one needs to go pretty gingerly, because one of the problems is, of course, the brakes are stone cold. So when you come to the first corner, you put the brakes on and they don't work, and even the second corner they don't work very much. So the combination of the brakes being cold, the conditions being wet, the road being narrow, and brick walls part of the way up, it's not a place where you take liberties.
The car is, of course, the Van Wall, with which Tony and Stirling Moss won the British Grand Prix at Aintree in 1957, and Tony's wearing still the same brown crash helmet. Now, here's something different, the gas turbine-powered Helmet from America, raced at Le Mans and Brands Hatch in 1969. Stirling Moss drove this big Eldorado Maserati in the Indianapolis-style Two Worlds Trophy at Monza in 1958, and it gave him one of the worst racing moments of his life.
I was doing about 160, 170 miles an hour around the banking at Monza, which means I was right up on the wall, which is about 90 or 100 feet high, and suddenly my arms crossed. Now, I'm not stupid, I knew something was wrong. And unfortunately, the steering had sheared. It went up about, because I was about a metre down from the very top, it went up a metre, knocked a couple of posts out, bent the armco, and spun off into the infield. And actually, I had nothing other than a small scratch, so I was very, very lucky. But I was absolutely convinced I was going to die. I was sure. I mean, you're doing 170 and taking off over the top. I thought, this is it.
Johnny Herbert again, this time in a Lotus 49. Which brought Formula One success to Jim Clark, Graham Hill and Jochen Rindt.
I'm personally very happy that I'm having a chance to drive a Lotus 49, because obviously driving for Lotus a few years ago, it now gives me a good opportunity to drive probably what was, I think, the most successful Lotus car as far as the early years with Jim Clark and Colin Chapman, and I think it's something that I have an opportunity of actually driving one. So something like that is very special, but there are so many different cars here that I think there'd be too many to actually say which one I'd like to have a go in.
And one of the most famous racing cars of all, the 300 SLR Mercedes, which Stirling Moss used to win the 1955 Mille Miglia.
I think you're courting disaster if you decide to go for a time, because obviously you try. As you say, it is narrow, but in the old days we used to race on pretty narrow streets, and I think if one's brave enough to have a go, okay, but I personally would rather go for a demonstration rather than the time.
Here it's mainly just showing the people. I think it's not very clever probably going out there trying to go quick and then wrapping it around some fence somewhere. So it's just mainly just to show the people the car.
In 1982, Williams built this experimental six-wheeled Formula One car. The rules at the time didn't specify that you had to have only 4 wheels. And Williams designer Patrick Head thought this might give more grip and traction. Rear tyres in those days were huge, and with its smaller rear wheels, the Williams six-wheeler had a lower frontal area, which should have given it more straight-line speed. Then, of course, they rewrote the rules, and the car never raced. But exercising it now is Brazilian Formula 3000 driver Max Wilson. Here's another strange shape that's disappeared from motor racing, the monstrous centre-seat Lola free formula car of Nick Whale, built specifically to race in the North American SCCA series with a big American V8 engine and about 600 horsepower. Talking of strange shapes, would you believe this is an MGF with modifications? It's designed to be driven in a straight line only, as fast as possible, to break world speed records. To drive it, they've got the fastest man on Earth, Andy Green, who last year achieved more than the speed of sound in the Black Rock Desert in Thrust 2. This is a rather gentler machine, although it is capable of more than 200 miles an hour. But it doesn't like corners much, and that parachute on the back won't help it stop today.
The Rover I've just driven up in, the MG, of course, being a turbo, as soon as it gets to 4,000 RPM, the turbo kicks in, as I discovered about 20 yards off the start line, where the car just went and wheel spun for the next 100 yards. It's very exciting to drive in this sort of weather.
Well, someone who should know his way up this hill is the man who lives here, the Earl of March and Kinrara. The car is a priceless Formula One Porsche from the Porsche Factory Museum. And it's on loan to his lordship for the weekend. As Charles March passes his own gaff on his left, the car has a flat 8-cylinder engine, air-cooled, 4 overhead camshafts, and it's beautifully made, like a watch. That's where there's mud across the road at one of the crossings, as Lord March comes into the tight left-hander at Molecombe Corner. And it's quick in a straight line, this little Porsche. But Dan Gurney said when he won the French Grand Prix in one of these cars that he thought it handled rather like a Volkswagen Beetle. Nick Mason is the drummer with the rock group Pink Floyd, and he's also a passionate car enthusiast, collector and racer. This is just one of his collection, the 1984 Porsche 962 3-litre turbo sports racer, and it's a real handful on the hill. Now here's Nick again in a very special Ferrari, the 1979 Le Mans version of the Berlinetta Boxer. Nick says it's a pussycat to drive, and he's much happier in it on the hill than the Porsche 962. Another Ferrari in the Mason household is being driven here at Goodwood by Nick's wife.
Nettie Mason, this is a superb Ferrari 250 GTO, which we've seen you driving before, I think, at Goodwood.
Yes, I've driven it. There's only 1 year I've missed, and that's because Nick, my husband, was on tour. But my most spectacular, I think, was last year when I actually managed to spin it. But I'm not intending to spin it this year. I'm going to take a nice, gentle drive up the hill, I think.
Now, Nick, your husband, is driving other beautiful cars here as well. You have quite a household of cars, or he does, I think.
Oh, he's got the most beautiful cars in the world, I think.
And this is certainly one of them, the original Ferrari 250 GTO. And the registration number is genuine, by the way. A real Ferrari GTO is worth about £2 million today. But Nick believes in using his cars, and Nettie's pushing on well through the puddles on what is now a waterlogged Goodwood Hill. This is another fast lady, Gillian Goldsmith, in the 1955 Bristol 450 Le Mans car that belongs to collector Simon Draper. Gillian's very accomplished on horseback and very quick on four wheels, an experienced hill climber, so on this slippery surface she feeds the power in gently to control the wheel spin. She's busy here at Goodwood, both with an Aston Martin DB4 Zagato and this unique Le Mans Bristol.
It's the only car that remains of the three original cars that came first, second and third in their class at Le Mans in 1955, so it really is a piece of motoring history. It's a wonderful car, very, very different from the Aston Martin to drive though, I must say.
And the Aston Martin, I don't like to think how much it's worth, but it must certainly be well into seven figures, but you seem to be driving it pretty hard up the hill.
I think the theme of Goodwood and people who genuinely love classic cars is they live when they're being raced, and thankfully for me, the owner is very happy for me to race it, and we've actually raced it in the Brooks Historic Championship in 1995, and a lot of Aston Martin sprints and hill climbs, and yes, we do. We race it hard and fast.
Everywhere you go, the fabulous sound of engines growling at you. Still to come, we've got those Indy cars all the way from America. We're celebrating 50 years of Lotus and 50 years of Porsche. Tough to find a parking space around here.
Generations of Indy cars, a classic collection seen for the first time at Goodwood, the models that dominated one of the world's greatest races, the Indianapolis 500.
The Indy 500 is really a place that you dream about as a kid. First you want to make the race or be able to qualify for it and then make it, and then you know, then your dream is to win it naturally, and then when you do, you want to keep winning it, but it's very special.
The black clouds over the circuit cleared for the arrival of one of the sport's brightest characters. Mario Andretti, IndyCar and Formula One legend, was paying his first visit to Goodwood.
We're having a ball, just sitting in the car, being reacquainted with old girlfriends, if you will. You know, that's what I call these cars.
From 1946 to 1998, the evolution of the IndyCar was changed dramatically by this Lotus 429, the baby of Englishman Colin Chapman, whose revolutionary ideas upstaged the Americans in their own brickyard.
His ideas and his technology opened the doors for us over there for rear engine cars and understanding them and starting to run them. So he was probably the guy that really was the smartest at that time.
He was always willing to just go beyond what was known, and sooner or later he was going to be on to something that was, you know, that had a specific advantage, and if you were on that ride, it was going to be a good ride.
The English influence is still there today in modern Indy cars, but the swift Ford Cosworth being thrown up the hill had the inimitable style of Mario Andretti written all over it.
Here's an almost mythical Indianapolis car, the last of the Novi Specials. This one had Ferguson four-wheel drive. Bobby Unser qualified this strange beast at 154 miles an hour in 1964, but the race didn't last long. He crashed it on lap 2. Today, Bud Bennett's at the wheel. This is the first of Dan Gurney's 1968 Indianapolis Eagles, with a 750 horsepower turbocharged Offenhauser engine. You can see the turbocharger sitting on the engine like a vacuum cleaner, frequently puffing out flames. Roger McCluskey got it up to second place in the race in '68. Chuck Haynes drives it today. This is what Indy cars looked like before Colin Chapman's rear-engine revolution. This is a classic Indy Roadster with Offenhauser engine lying on its side to get the bonnet line lower. It's the Eppley Daimler Special, and it ran 6 times at Indianapolis, finishing second in 1958 and third in 1960. They didn't race in the rain at Indy, but Mark Montanos, who owns this beautifully restored car, is using plenty of welly on the waterlogged hill. And during the rebuild, 85-year-old Quinn Eppley, who built this car 45 years ago, helped with the restoration. Now here's a motorcycle to die for, the wonderful streamlined Norton Neela. And astride it, the motorcycle veteran, Sammy Miller. It was built in 1953 and got its name from the rider's forward crouched position with his legs stretched out behind him. But its bulk side-on made it vulnerable to crosswinds. And in the end it remained a dramatic-looking cul-de-sac in racing motorcycle design. But it's Sammy's pride and joy, and he's tucked well down behind the screen as he storms down to Malcolm Corner.
Really, when you get used to it, it's quite a good bike to ride, and obviously it was a very, very advanced idea in 1953. It was made in Belfast, where I was born. Norton factory commissioned Artie Bell and the McCandless brothers to come up with some futuristic ideas, and this is what they came up with. When I was a small boy going to school, we used to hear stories about this bike and Northwest 200 when I was a little boy watching it, and it's very close to my heart, and it's in our museum and one of my prized possessions in our museum in New Milton.
BMW sidecar outfits dominated their world championships for 20 years. This is the 1964 outfit of Rudolf Meretstetter and Alex Mayer. And of course, watching the bikes just as closely as the cars is Murray Walker.
Well, Murray, what's the one memory you're going to take away from today?
Oh, John Surtees on the BMW, because I'm a BMW freak, and I saw George Meyer win the Senior TT in 1939 in the Isle of Man on that bike, and I got a photograph of it in my scrapbook at home, and I never thought I'd see it again, but John's found it and rebuilt it. And you've got the great Surtees on the great bike, and that's what I'll take home with me.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to mention the war, but not just yet. First, let me take you back to the early 30s when Auto Union dominated Grand Prix racing, a car designed by one Ferdinand Porsche. He also created the Volkswagen Beetle and perfected the supercharger for Mercedes-Benz. Here it comes, technology that transferred neatly to Messerschmitt bombers. Little surprise then that Ferdinand was Hitler's favorite engineer. Whatever his politics, he was a brilliant designer, and in 1948 produced the first Porsche, the 356, based on the Beetle, a design that was to win its class at Le Mans in 1951. The famous French circuit has played an important part in the history of Porsche, with the German manufacturer chalking up countless victories, the most recent of which was this year.
I'm extremely proud that we managed to be victorious. I'm extremely proud that we did it on the 50th anniversary of Porsche and the 100th anniversary of Michelin. And now it's very satisfying to be part of that sort of history.
Porsche is a giant in the world of sports cars, but they also made their mark in Formula One, this single-seater 804 winning the 1962 French and Solitude Grand Prix. But ever since the first 356, sports cars and Le Mans has been what really matters. And if the 356 is the spirit of Porsche, its illegitimate brother, the 91730, the world's most powerful road car of all time is Porsche's soul. Clark, Hill, Rindt, Andretti, Mansell and Senna, just 5 Formula One world champions who owe Lotus and its founder Colin Chapman a debt of gratitude. The team may no longer line up on the grid, but the legend will live forever.
It's one of the most successful British Formula One teams that we've ever had, and the name is still a famous name, and it's still a good name, and it's still linked with success, and it could have lost that if it had carried on and struggled and dragged the name down.
While the name of Lotus was well and truly established by the 1970s, it is arguably in its black and gold Formula One livery that it'll be best remembered. The JPS winning the manufacturer's title in 1978, and this Lotus 79, plus the genius of Colin Chapman, landing the driver's crown for Mario Andretti in 1979.
He would be there at the beginning of a wave, if you will, but he would be there with the idea, and then somebody else would perfect it.
Yeah.
You know, then he would get bored, he would go on to something else. But he, as I say, you know, it just you can go on and on and on and talk about just what he has started, and you marvel by it because it never really stopped.
Now we're with Michèle Mouton, the very determined, very talented former World Rally Champion in her works Audi Quattro Sport Evolution. She's been very quick at Goodwood before. She's got her eyes on fastest time of the day, and in these conditions, her car is certainly going to be one of the most competitive. And you can see how hard she's working if you look at the front wheels sawing from side to side as she goes down to Molecombe Corner. On the brakes now. Tweak it in. That extraordinary chirping sound you get from the turbochargers on this 600 horsepower car, getting all the power down as she goes up to the right-hander, past the wall, and it's quite dry in patches further up, but then you get onto a wet patch, and it's very, very treacherous. Now the dash up to the finish for Michèle Mouton. Over the finish line, 56 seconds dead for Michèle Mouton.
Michèle, how was that run?
It was better than the first one. Every time I drive more, better it is. But I missed the start. With the gear, I missed the start. But okay, it's fun. And
how often do you drive it?
Once a year at Goodwood.
Now one of the Tyrrells. It's Paul Osborne in the 1990 Tyrrell Cosworth 019. The Harvey Postlethwaite design that introduced the feet-up driving position with the driver's legs going uphill. And Paul's going uphill on a now drier surface very tidily. A neat line, keeping the revs up, and now hard on the power as he goes for the line. .05.06 seconds for Paul Osborne. Now on the line, another ferocious rally car. This is the Belgian Bruno Thierry in Ford's current World Championship Challenger. As he flicks up through that 6-speed sequential gearbox, he's got 300 horsepower from the turbocharged engine, permanent four-wheel drive, and the secret is how little time he comes off the power for the corners. You'll see at the top of the steering wheel, at top dead centre, he's got a little piece of white tape, and that's to remind him when the front wheels are pointing straight ahead, and they very rarely are. He goes over the apex, on the grass, taking the tightest possible line for Molecombe, and then hard on the power for the straight blast up to the quick right-hand flick by the brick wall. Still hard on the power, it's dry, it's wet, it's wet, it's dry, very slippery and very treacherous surface, but Bruno Thierry used to this, used of course to driving the Escort on very slippery surfaces in rallying. The finish line is in sight, it's going to be quick, it's 54.12 seconds for Bruno Thierry. Now the big V12 Mercedes FIA GT car, Bernd Mailander, Mercedes Works driver, at the wheel. Well, unlike the nimble rally cars, this big FIA GT car is completely unsuited to the narrow Goodwood hill, but Bernd Mailander is grappling with the task, headlights ablaze, windscreen wiper going, and it's how much he can stay on the power. He has to come off much earlier for the left-hander at Moulcombe, and then he's hard on the power once more. Look at the car bottoming in a shower of sparks as he goes into the right-hand flick by the brick wall. On the power again, Bernd Mailander working very hard in a car which is really designed for flat-out work on big, wide, artificial motor racing circuits. Now the finish line is in sight. He can use all the V12 6-litre power of the Mercedes. Over the line he goes, and it's 53.1 seconds. Now, this is a 25-year-old Formula One car. No way should it be competitive with the modern machinery, but that's reckoning without Martin Stretton's incredible car control, shaving the straw bales as he goes down the straights. The marshals were taking a pace backwards. Martin Stretton with tremendous commitment, pushing the old Tyrrell as hard as it can possibly go. He's now on his run up towards the top of the hill, and the howl of the V8 Cosworth engine takes him in sight of the finish line. Martin Stretton, it's going to be a quick time, 50.91.
The car's working quite nicely, and it's very nice. The track is wet, but it doesn't seem to be muddy or anything, and it's very controllable, and it's just, I'm having a ball. It's great fun.
It's not slippery then?
Yeah, I guess it's probably a little slippery, but I'm notoriously stupid, so I probably didn't notice.
You're acquiring all your car control?
Yeah, there was a couple of times where I thought, maybe I'm not going fast enough, then I decided I was.
Are we going to see BTD for Stretton? Well, here's the man who ought to be able to stop him. McLaren Formula 3000 star and F1 test driver Nick Heidfeld in one of last year's McLaren Mercedes MP412s. Real state-of-the-art stuff, 750 horsepower, and they've been tweaking the suspension of this car to make it work better on a wet, slippery lane, which is not the sort of conditions that it was designed to do. And he's rocketing up the straight in a cloud of spray, goes through the right-hander, past the wall. This is Nick Heidfeld looking for best time of day with the McLaren, and now already he's on the final run towards the finish line. He goes under the banner, and it's 48.3 for Nick Heidfeld. Well, that final run did give Nick Heidfeld fastest time of the weekend in the McLaren MP4, just ahead of the brilliantly driven old Tyrrell of Martin Stretton, and Bernd Mailander, a brave third in that great big Mercedes-Benz.
Well, that's it. The crowds are starting to filter away now, and there's some faces with pretty big smiles on them, I can tell you. We've had some thrills and spills out here on the hill climb course. We've had the heroes and legends of motor racing here, and some cars that, frankly, are beautiful enough to make you weep. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. That's it from this year's Goodwood Festival of Speed.